Okay, it's 6:55, and I'm going to call the workshop to order. And first item on the agenda is the Parks Master Plan. I believe we have somebody here to make a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you. Good
Thank you.
evening. My name is Carissa McMullen, and I'm a landscape architect with Landwork Studio. We were contracted a little less than a year ago to take a look at 3 parks in your park system. And we have completed that master plan, and we're here to present the results of that to you tonight. Oh, next slide. So I just want to take some time to walk you through our process a little bit to tell you the information that we collected, where we got our information, how we gathered it, and then how we used it. Next slide. As part of our park planning initiation, we came to town and we met with city staff, and we toured and visited the parks system. We learned a little bit about the community, and we do that in the initiation phase. There's some information. We were just talking here what the population of the city of Bel Aire is at this point in time, and it's about 8,822 people. I don't know if this is new information to you. You probably have this, but it is information that we collect and utilize as we make recommendations for the park system. I don't know that there's anything here that stands out as unusual or unexpected. You have a high rate of high school graduates or higher. You have more than 50% of your population has bachelor's degrees or higher. Your median age is just a little over 34 years old. Next slide. So then we moved into discovery. We completed assessments. We again visited the parks. We complete a thorough analysis of the park system. Those forms are in the appendix of the master plan, so you can see the information that we've collected. We do a park inventory. A lot of this information you know, but it's nice to have it all collected then in one place. We completed a citizen survey. This is something that we did online. We developed the questions specific to the 3 parks that we were looking at, but also since we had the opportunity to collect survey data, we asked quite a few other questions as well, just to collect some background information that you might find useful. That's also in the appendix of the master plan. And then we also hosted an open house at the Bel Aire Rec Center. And Mr. Dean was there and had a lot of engagement with some really interested folks. Next slide. So I'll just walk through a little bit about what we collected in the assessment and what we found. All 3 of the parks that we looked at were rated in the excellent category. So you may say that there's nothing that needs to be done, but we did find some opportunities for some improvements. So you can see here some of the scores that we collected. We have the accessibility score, and that's been the most challenging, and that is typically the most challenging in older park systems. We look at how comfortable and what the character is of the park. Is there shade for people? Are there places to sit? Those kinds of things. Usability, are there things there that people want to use? And then what amenities are there and what kind of condition are they in? So you can see Bel Aire Park scored a 79 out of 100. The lowest score being that accessibility and the amenities. Next slide. For the Bel Aire Recreation Complex, this is the one that I assume that it's the trail system that's lacking that gave this accessibility score. Just a little over half there. But it also did rate as excellent. Next slide. And then Central Park, 76 out of 100. Again, accessibility. I think this one, when we look at this park, this has so much potential. There's a lot of opportunity, and it's a matter of maximizing what could happen in this space. The facilities that are there, we did the assessment on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. This is the citizen survey. We had 346 people participate in the survey. And how many were you hoping for, Brian?
I really don't the same.
We did.
We were pleasantly
We-
surprised at the number.
We always go in and say about how many people do you think that we're going to be able to reach when we take this when we send out the survey, and the number just kept going, and we just kept getting more and more people take it, and that's just always a really great sign that we're on the right track. People want to talk about their park systems. So again, this is a summary. This was shared at the open house. People rated their parks, these 3 parks, just a little over 3 out of 5. So that's a pretty good rating. Again, the people who took the survey, age range. We had the survey open from February, the end of February, to about the middle of April. So we sent out several reminders as well. So it did have a great reach. From the citizen survey, we learned that people talk to their neighbors. That's how they know a lot of things that are going on. They get information through the newsletter as well. So you're doing a decent job of communicating through social media as well. So for Central Park, you can see here, people like the pool. They like the walking trail. They appreciate the playground. What they'd really like to see is some picnic shelters. And the splash pad has been a conversation that continues to come up for that location as well. The recreation complex, we think maybe the information was a little bit skewed because we hosted the open house at the recreation center. We had a lot of people who participate in the programs who had kids at ball games. That was intentional so we could have a good turnout for the open house. But they definitely appreciate the recreation center, the programs, and want to see more. So their desired amenities, again, is accessibility for the walking trails and improvements to the recreation building itself, either expansion or remodel or both. And then for Bel Aire Park, people are appreciating the new playground, the newer playground that is there. They do like the open space. They like the picnic shelter. They'd like to see a walking looped trail. And I know one of the comments that we had received was that the separation of the playground, the small sand playground that's there now versus the older 5 to 12, that separation is challenging for parents to keep an eye on both. So some improvements and opportunities there. Next slide. Here are a few photos from the open house. If you didn't make it out, that's too bad because there was ice cream and that was a huge hit. I think we handed out over 150 pieces of ice cream, I think was the note that we have. And we heard a lot about the Bel Aire Recreation Complex, of course. That's what people wanted to talk about, the ball fields especially. When can we have more? Bel Aire Park, you can see here the comments, restroom facility, some parking, and some additional playground equipment. And then for Central Park, people really like the pool. They like the idea of some pickleball courts and finding ways to activate the pond. So we presented some of the boards, the general concepts, and you can see here in that bottom photo, we asked people to place dots on what it is that they like. And then we had some imagery off to the side, what things got their attention or that would think was appropriate for that particular park property. And so we collected all of that information and summarized it. Next slide. So here's a look at the recommendations after we took the concepts to the open house and collected some feedback. We made some revisions, and these are the concepts that are in the final plan. Our recommendations for Bel Aire Park are to increase the usability for residents. That happens with parking. We talked about parking, and then it wasn't that long, maybe a couple of weeks ago, Brian called and said that the project on North Woodlawn actually included some parking. So we added it in there, so you can already check that off as a completed item from the master plan. The challenge with Bel Aire Park is the disrepair of the tennis court that's there. and it's not as functional or usable, and it's taking up a decent amount of space for the park that the size that it is. So the recommendation is to put 2 playgrounds in the same proximity where a parent can keep an eye on both groups. Across the board, there's some lacking new playground amenities, the cable structures and some of the taller towers and some of the things that would attract kids that would be in that more 12 age range, some more challenging elements. So this is an opportunity to do that if we were to remove the tennis court. The basketball court is in pretty good shape, and the idea of keeping that there and possibly including some multi-sport activities on that court to maximize the pavement. Are there any questions about Bel Aire Park?
Your recommendation is to remove the tennis court. I didn't see that you put a tennis court in any place else. Is that correct? In any other park?
We do.
Oh, okay. Then
We do.
very good. All right. Thank you.
We did put some rough cost estimates together too, and then we've got some line items, but there's a wholesale number there for the proposed improvements. Next slide. For the Bel Aire Recreation Complex, here's where your tennis court shows up. The idea of keeping the athletic or recreational activities in a park-like recreation complex makes a lot of sense. Because there was such good feedback on the athletic facilities, we really looked at improving what you have there, increasing the accessibility with trails and then direct sidewalks to get to the different fields. This doesn't change the layout too terribly much. We do remove the road that cuts through the middle of the property, and that does free up a lot of space. I think some opportunities here at the recreation complex that we found really exciting was the possibility to add a destination playground, because you have enough parking here and you would have enough other activities for other people, other family members to participate in. The playground is there. It did rate high. People do use that playground that's there, but it is for smaller children, and it's not the most conducive place for families to be along the roadway there. And the other opportunity is to locate more of a central feature, a community gathering, kind of the heart of the park kind of a space. You can see that with the 2 shelters here next to the lion shelter, some pavement there that could be for the portable stage or, any kind of small music venue, Bel Aire Days, those kinds of things could happen really in the center of this really nice green space. This does allow us to get some decent sized fields in here and then get the football field in there that is sharing some space now. We are also showing on this park the opportunity for a dog park. You can see that along the trees on the left edge here, just south of the destination playground. Large park, large dogs and small dogs, both. Are there any questions about this?
Is
It
there,
has a little higher price tag. Oh, we do also show some expansion of the recreation building there as well.
is that the white area?
Correct.
Okay. So is there, what's happened with all the parking? There's a lot of parking on the west side of that building now. Is that going away, or am I seeing this wrong?
What you're seeing is the existing parking lot now. It's unchanged.
It's all green. Okay. Wait, okay. Am I seeing it right? The gray is the parking?
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I was looking at it wrong then. Okay.
I was just curious, maybe this was outside the scope of what you guys looked at, but just your thoughts, like I think some kids probably walk to Sunrise through there. I know my kids like having that area that's out of traffic to ride their kind of bikes back and forth, and that road, if you take that away. Did you guys look at the kind of the downsides of that, or you feel like the trade-off's worth it?
I think the trade-off is worth it, but there is still the possibility of connection there through the ball fields and then straight north.
Yeah, the improved trail all the way around is what you're suggesting, right? As well as all the sidewalks in between.
Correct.
Yep.
Yep.
The
Yeah,
ball-
there's interconnectivity and then the circular loop.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see. It's kind of hard to see, but it's really small. There is a concrete path all the way around,
Yeah.
replacing the existing dirt path.
And that's the most requested on all of our park projects, our trails and connectivity. So
If anybody remembers the master bike plan that we have for the city, does it not connect into this park somehow? Okay. And
Yeah,
this plan doesn't interrupt that. It complements that? Okay. Thank you.
okay, next slide. So then the last park that we looked at, the Central Park. This is the one again that has the most potential. And the concept here, the recommendation is to activate it. And we look at doing that in a couple of different ways. You can see here we've added a destination shelter, something that could be rentable for weddings, birthday parties, graduation parties, those kinds of things. You'll see that between the lake and the proposed pickleball courts. We do know that the Fisher people appreciate this pond. If there's the option to add a couple of docks or some way to get down to the water, right on the water, was one of our recommendations. We look at expanding a little bit the playground that's there. Again, looking for opportunities to add some of the newer playground elements. What's there is in pretty good condition and it's being used. So this is just adding to what's already there and then providing a shelter for that playground as well. And you can see that closer to East Central Park Avenue there and the parking lot that's there. This plan shows adding a restroom. You can see that between the pickleball courts and the playground currently. And then there was a lot of conversation about the swimming pool. We understand that it's been a challenge to maintain and understanding what the costs are to get that to a manageable facility. People do like the pool. They do like this park because of the pool. But the surveys did indicate the splash pad is also something that people would want. So it's not one or the other, but both. And when we looked at this, there really is opportunity around the aquatic facility now to take advantage of those restroom facilities and the bathhouse and at some point add a splash pad there if there was resources to do that. This again, it improves the connectivity, adds a loop trail. You can see you can go all the way around from the parking area down by the lake and back, and connectivity to the neighborhoods. Are there any questions about that?
On this park, I had several citizens bring up just how open it is and made specific reference to the overhead lines and the Evergy easement. In your experience, have you seen communities partner with Evergy or other utilities to utilize that space in a productive way, or are you essentially just avoiding it? Kind of looks like you're avoiding sort of that area.
We are avoiding the area, leaving that as open green space.
Gotcha. Nothing more to add though.
We have do you have any experience with Evergy?
No.
I'm good.
Nothing.
I'm phoning a friend, Jeff.
Oh, you're phoning.
Do you?
No.
I've worked for them for 37 and a half years. They won't let you build a structure in their right of way. As far as sidewalks or something like that, they might. But they won't let you build structures underneath the right of way.
Yeah, and then when you know, and then you know, just thinking with big bubble around that whole thing. They rule with an iron fist.
So one of the comments I heard from a citizen about the area around the lake, particularly this lake, is that the grass is mowed too short, that it should be taller to help reduce the runoff into the lake of pollutants like chemicals from fertilizing and all the other things we do to grass and lawns. And I don't have the expertise in that area. I don't know exactly what should be done or shouldn't be done, but that's what I did have feedback from a citizen about.
That's interesting.
And I would kind of second your comments about that night. One of the reasons I really wanted to go is I wanted to make sure that citizens understood that we are not promising any of this. And I was very clear about that. Like, this is concept stage. We're trying to figure out what's best for our community and trying to sort of gauge everybody's interest and then try to prioritize. So that was one of the main concerns I had with doing the open house, was making sure that citizens understood we're in a really early stage. We have not committed any funds to the project, so to speak, other than doing the master plan. And one of the biggest comments I heard was, we love the pool, because a lot of them had heard about us potentially deciding to close the pool. So that was said over and over and over again. There were several comments made about a splash pad. Two different citizens mentioned Park City currently doing master planning for parks and whether or not we are coordinating with Park City. And I said, no, we are not. But thank you for the comment. That's interesting. Their comment went back to, you know, if we're all doing the same thing, maybe we don't need to build similar facilities because we're all in the northeast part of, or North Sedgwick County. And so I appreciated that comment. I think it was coming from a position of trying to be efficient and not try to do too much with our limited funds. And then another thing that was mentioned was questions about Sunrise and about the facility at the rec and abutting Sunrise's property and what's Sunrise's plan with their campus and their fields, and how could that potentially complement each other, coordinate with each other. Those kinds of things kept coming up. I heard that from a couple citizens, so I wanted to make sure I said that. And then two other things. Tennis courts did come up. People kept asking. We hear pickleball's the craze, but we don't want to lose our tennis courts. I heard that multiple times. And then there was a lot of interest on some of the biggest items I kept hearing were restrooms, having restrooms at parks. So I just wanted to kind of summarize some of the main things I heard. But thank you.
Thank you. Restrooms come up after trails. I think restrooms do always come up. Next slide. This is our last one. So this is coming up with the recommendations was an interesting process because we knew about the entire system, a little bit about the entire system from the survey and from talking to the public, but we were really just focused on these three parks. But we thought that this was a good opportunity to capture what we had heard, what you're doing well, and what you can do more of that you've already started. So our first priority here is evaluate the facilities that underperform, and that includes the tennis courts and the swimming pool and or require excessive maintenance. So that's the top priority, really. Then we looked at updating the playgrounds, making sure that the playgrounds are still engaging the right age groups and enough of the age groups. And there's always, every year there's something neat and new in the playground world, so you can't always keep up. But the Postum platform is the tried and true, but there are some really fun things out there that could be added to the parks that would make a great difference. We talk a lot, you hear a lot about making sure that the playgrounds are accessible and all inclusive and those kinds of things, so that you're capturing not those with mobility issues, but also autism and some of the other populations that are really looking for playground activities. Our third recommendation was that recognizing the community center as the hub. When we saw so much activity with the Lions shelter was busy with hot dogs, and all of the fields were busy, and the recreation center was full, and people were obviously very comfortable there. It's the place that they like to be. Having community festivals and the central gathering place and those kinds of activities, I think is really warranted, and the population is hungry for those. And then lastly, continuing promotion of the parks and programming, using the social media. I mentioned, we hear that people are hearing about things, but it was interesting in the survey when we asked, why don't you use this park, or what keeps you from using this park? There was a lot of, it's too far, or it's a little too far, or and so how do we communicate? It's not that far. It's not that Central Park isn't that far, but I think it does have a perception that it's out here or over there, and ways that we can promote that and make sure that people know that it's not a homeowners association. It is a city park property, and it's accessible to you. So with that,
I had one more comment on the trail. Did anybody comment on that? I think it was built in the late 90s at the rec center property, that sort of dirt trail that goes around the property. But I noticed on here, if I'm looking at it right, all of these paths / trails are concrete, you're recommending, right?
correct.
Is that just like preferred for maintenance, or that's what you're seeing the trend people prefer for having bikes on them as well?
Yes, and to be accessible, to be truly accessible. Paved trails are good for that.
Are these normally like the 10-foot we do like along the streets, or is these like a 6-foot wide path, or what is the width of these
Or
paths?
split the difference and do 8 feet.
Okay.
8 feet's probably a minimum if you're going to have strollers and dogs and people passing each other.
I did have one question on the paths. Now that you mentioned that, in any of the surveying, did any comments come back about connectivity of the parks, like the parks connecting via bike, walk path, nature trail? I've heard that from several citizens. Like, if they were more connected, maybe I would, take that loop or whatever.
Yeah, we did
I know
have-
that's not feasible in all parks, but did that come up at all during any of the survey?
I don't recall in the survey, but I know the gentleman at the open house, and I'm sure you spoke with him as well, that bikes for transportation, bikes everywhere. And the conversation was the more connectivity that we can get everywhere, then I think he and his wife would pretty much bike primarily.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily specific for the parks. It seemed like an overwhelming improvement for connectivity. That's what I kind of got out of it too.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So we have the full master plan. If you haven't seen it, this is just a summary of that document, and the surveys and all of the information are in the appendix. So you can take a look at the answers to all of the questions, and then I'm always available.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith?
I was just going to ask, so this is all really good information, and the recommendations, are, I think, good recommendations. As you think about Bel Aire's parks in the context of the surrounding communities, our area, somewhat to your comments, Mr. Dean, around, hey, what are we doing that everyone, else isn't? Is there anything, kind of about this proposed plan that you feel like differentiates Bel Aire's spaces, public spaces, from that of what's typically available in our area?
That's a good question. When I think about the variety of parks, Bel Aire, for the size, for the population, there are a lot of parks here, and there are a lot of different, you have nature areas, you have Eagle Lake, you have the large green spaces, and then you have the more concentrated athletic complex. So I would say, as far as the city goes and the population of less than 9,000 people, the amount of acreage that you have for parks per person is very high. And they're
No,
well
that's good.
maintained. I mean, they're well taken care of.
So I was also just kind of adding up the numbers at the bottom of the slides, and just my attention was drawn to the fine print. And I know you made them really small, but I couldn't help but observe the many millions of dollars that these total recommendations add up to. And of course, like when you start asking questions about what would people like, what would you like to see, the folks that are commenting on that, we don't have any context. When I contributed those surveys, I don't have any context about what do those things typically cost. And when looking at any decision, you've got to think about the cost and the value, not just the value and sides of that equation. How would you, based on the public input, did you get anything that would help us as a city council kind of prioritize how those dollars are spent, or understand in the context of the cost of these items, which things would create the most value for the community?
I think it's the playgrounds. I think it's updating, refreshing the playgrounds, especially Bel Aire Park. That's the oldest park in the system. It's located, it's highly visible. I would start there, start with the replacement of the tennis court.
I was going to the exact same place because I was out of town during that open house, but there was no pricing attached or anything like that to any of these recommendations when the public saw them.
There was not.
And then this isn't so much a question as one thing I wanted to point out is that Catholic Care is really generous with their property, and they have some really nice walking trails that they encourage people to walk around their lake, and some very neat trails back there. You did not take any of that into consideration since that is not a city park, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We just focused on these three.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation and all the work you've put into this, and we'll hopefully we can make some headway with it. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the pool, and I think that Mr. Hayes has some comments to make or things to talk about. You got a presentation? Looks like it.
Hi, guys. I'm going to be quick. All right. If we can get my pictures up on the wall.
You have the silver bullet answer for the pool tonight.
Yeah. Great.
The low cost, high value option.
Here we go.
It was a little challenging to work on the master plan for this park with this pool this year, I will say.
So I want to thank Carissa for coming. She didn't explain her connection to Bel Aire. When I was hired 28 years ago, she was on the Park and Rec Committee. She used to live in Bel Aire.
Yeah.
And so I've known her as long as I've worked for the city of Bel Aire. She shortly thereafter moved towards Kansas City and started her own business. But every year at the Park and Rec Conference, always look her up and say hi. So
I appreciate you not forgetting me.
I didn't forget her. So she actually helped. She worked early in her career. She helped when they designed Brookhauser Park.
Oh.
She had part of that. She had part of that deal. So, all right, the Central Park swimming pool. Here we go again, guys. We had a great summer. The pool was well used, although it was cool and rainy in June and July. Our daily attendance was down a little bit over previous years, but everything else was up. So, I mean, we had a really good year, above average year this past summer. The revenue was up quite a bit, thanks to the governing body authorizing increased fees. Our day fees were down, but everything else was up. So if you see down in the bottom right, since the HOAs have not been here, it's the most revenue the pool has ever got. So you got to go back to 2019 when we were getting almost $25,000 a year from the HOAs to help subsidize the pool. So if you really do the math, the pool did better this year financially than it ever did. And the attendance was even down because of the weather. And of course, y'all heard we had to close a couple days early because the pump fried. So great year, great summer at the pool. So we do have issues. The plaster is another year older and another year rougher than it was last year. When we prepped the pool to get ready to open this year, a couple weeks before opening, this 30-foot crack showed its face. We were pretty freaked out at the beginning, thinking it was a structural crack in the concrete below. It kind of is, but we did get the water back in, and it didn't leak. And we did do some simple water loss tests, and our pool engineer is going to talk about that here in a little bit. The pool is not leaking. And 2 days before we were supposed to close, the pump fried. So that was very unfortunate. So we do have some current issues at the pool. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of numbers. You have all the information in your packet, but we do have plaster estimates again. Last year, if you remember, I only found one. This year I found two. And both of those companies are in the Kansas City area, and they'll come here. And those plaster estimates do include fixing that crack, which is a considerable amount, that 30-foot crack. There's also some alternate estimates in the same line as the plaster. There's an exposed aggregate finish which actually is kind of a plaster finish, but it's smoother than the Portland cement plaster. It costs a little bit more. It also includes fixing that crack. Then there's another surface that one company does called an interglass surface. It's more of a coating on the pool. They'll fix the cracks and fix what's underneath it. And this surface, of course, is the most expensive, but don't let those warranties fool you too much, because the warranty is only as good as what's underneath it. So our engineer can probably tell us a little bit more on that too. They'll give warranties on the product that it's not going to flake off and come off. But if you got a groundwater issue or you got a mechanical issue, they're not going to warranty that. So we do have those quotes for plaster and almost like plaster surfaces. I kind of like the interglass surface. I need to maybe do some more research on it and talk to those people. It's a lot smoother surface. It's supposed to last a lot longer.
Is there a difference in repairability of those different plaster options?
Those would all be the same. Now, I did go ahead and get vinyl liners again, just because we did look at that last year. These prices aren't that much more than what was quoted last year, but remember, these prices aren't going to probably fix what's underneath. I mean, they're not going to fix any hydrostatic problems. They're not going to, those cracks that have to be repaired, that's not going to, that'll be on top of these figures on the vinyl liner. So that's kind of a review of last year's report that we talked about. Here, the pump also went out. It's not a real big deal. It is, but because it's $5,000 for a brand new one. But this is pretty typical of a pool. This is the second pump this pool has had. The first pump got rebuilt twice before we replaced it in 10 years. So this one is 7 years old, and we can rebuild it. It costs anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500, depending on the internal parts, seals and impellers and things like that. Or a brand new replacement pump's $5,000. So the pool is going to need that. Okay, so with us today is a gentleman that I met recently. He's been around Wichita a while. He works with a lot of pools. He's got local experience in design, construction, and renovation. He did do an assessment of our pool. He's going to talk about that a little bit. But he's got experience with all the Wichita Ys, local school districts, local rec commissions. And I'm kind of curious to visit with him about the Rolling Hills Country Club. That's probably a similar kind of pool than what we have. But he's going to provide a general assessment. You have that report in your packet of the pool. He has inspected it. I've told him about it. I gave him the history of the pool. And there's some other things he can help us, kind of depending on what is decided upon, to help guide us through if we fix it. If we, look at alternatives, he's got that expertise that can help us along the way. So Brad is with Midwest Engineering, and He's going to give you a little brief outline of what he has found and answer any questions that you might have. Thanks, guys.
And once again, I'm Brad Ward. And Brian did pretty good history on what I've been involved with. A lot of the different pools I've worked with. There's a couple other consultants here in town that I work with that we've been involved with. 259, Maze, Derby Rec Center. The YMCA's thoroughly since day one on the revamping of everything on that. So we've looked at a lot of different pools. We've done a lot of different evaluations of older pools and, conditions of the pools, whether or not they're worth saving, whether or not how to renovate them, what can be done, do they meet ADA requirements, and all that fun stuff on those items here. Usually when we get a call, pool's in a lot worse condition than what you have. And so they're a little bit more intensive on what you have to look at. Sort of look at this. I mean, it's obvious this was built more as a developer or residential style pool and not typically a heavier commercial type pool. And especially for a community, usually you have a few more amenities associated with it. But I mean, for the most part, it sounds like this pool works well for the size and the number of the users that are there. But overall, the pool's in good condition. I mean, even the liner, the concrete, you've got a couple cracks. That's normal especially an outdoor pool. You've got so much expansion contraction with freezing and thawing and temperatures raising and stuff like that. You're going to get cracks. You're going to see some of those things, and it's just how you keep up with them. You just don't let them go on and on and on. You do have to do repairs on a regular basis. The cracks are probably the biggest item that you have, and some of that plaster. Once you get a little crack in the plaster surface that you have, if you got any imperfections or anything like that, that's what's going to be a weak spot on a plaster finish. A lot of other types of finishes you can do, like Brian priced up different types of plaster on this, but there's a lot of, especially exterior pools that are painted, just a painted finish. Sometimes they'll put a little texture to it so it has a little roughness to it, so you just don't slide all over the place, but it not quite as a thick of material as what a plaster finish would be. But that's more of a typical type application is having the painted finish. And it's probably a little bit less maintenance over the long term too on that end of it, but different levels, pros and cons. There's a lot of different, some people would say plaster is better than a painted finish, and some would say, you get into a gunite type finish, or even just, there's just a number of different ways to apply it. But it's, like I said, the critical part is maintaining it and knowing that you're going to have to maintain it in exterior pools because of how much movement they go through. And it's not because of quality of installation of it. It's just they move. You've got water in it. You got it holding down temperature. Temperature is the biggest fault on a lot of the exterior pools. And eventually you do have to do some pretty good sizable work on them, and they're not cheap on that end of it. So, but like I said, overall it is in good shape. It's a simple pool. Easy to maintain, very easy to maintain overall. There's a lot more complex type systems out there. It's just my initial feeling when I first walked into it thinking, okay, this is a municipal pool, city pool, it was just small. And it's really basic. You get into some of the other ones, you've got other shade structures or water features that may be there, diving boards and those types of amenities that are associated with a lot of the municipal pools that you see. But, every pool is a little different. Every community is a little different. So you sort of go from that end of it. So, not to get too much into, you've got the report that I wrote for the general assessment. It's pretty basic. Sort of mine and Brian's conversation is more of this to give you some sort of sounding board that's independent. I'm not here to say you're designing a new pool. I could care less. Or if you do decide that way, you can use somebody else. And I'm just sort of the sounding board. And from my experiences with the other pools around the area, can give you a lot of feedback on that.
Well, one question I do have is about that crack, the 30-foot crack. So we go and fix it. And I get that that's just the normal ebb and flow of pool maintenance. Okay. So these plaster proposals have these 5-year warranties. They're limited warranties, and I'm going to guess the limit is if that crack re-breaks the plaster, they're not going to warranty the plaster.
A lot of it is the prep work that goes on behind it, and the quality of what is underlying it. So like for the crack, I mean, they've already got it in the number to repair the crack. So they would be cleaning that part up. And, if they prep it and repair it properly, that's the reason why they're good with that 5-year or 10-year, whatever warranty that they want to throw behind it. And and that's included in their number. Now, if somebody were to go in there and just say, hey, well, I'm going to plaster this, and they don't do anything with the crack, then that's an issue. But most of these entities, what they'll do is a couple different ways to do it now. Now that they're pinning, they'll cut out sections and they'll pin both sides of that crack together and they epoxy it in place, sort of like what you see on the roads when they're cutting in and putting in the rebar and additional stuff on that part of it. The more standard is they'll grind out the crack, make sure there's no loose materials, and they epoxy that in, and then prep over the top before they're applying their plaster surface.
Okay.
So, but that's, a lot of that just depends on how their process is doing it. And as long as they know it's there, it's usually not a big deal on that part. And I guess probably the biggest part on any pool is that you're always going to have some sort of maintenance. I mean, finishes wise, I haven't really looked into the glass finish on that one. That a 25-year lifespan on a pool, to me personally, is pretty aggressive, really aggressive. Somebody's pretty proud of what they're doing. Most things on pools, we sort of look at in the 7 to no more than 15-year lifespan that you've got to do something, whether it's painting, plastering, replacing pumps, fixing pipes that go out to the pool, repairing decks. There's always going to be some of that in that time frame. Sure. The better the quality of you putting it in, a little bit longer. But I personally probably wouldn't go over 15 years on anything on a pool. It's just it's a very aggressive environment to be in. So,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. D.
I had a quick question. There's a lot of talk about groundwater with this pool when it was first built, and then when it's been repaired in the past. Are you, in your experience, are you worried about the continuation of groundwater and it continuing to cause more cracks? And I assume a new crack would void the warranty that we're talking about. The crack that they repair would be under warranty with the liner, but if we keep having crack issues because of groundwater pressure, that's probably outside of their warranty and would sort of be a repair price at sort of our risk. But in your experience, are you worried about the groundwater with the pool and the condition it's in right now?
I'm not particularly worried about it. And the reason being is, I mean, I did go around what you've got and sort of the history behind when it was built. Okay. So, when it was built, no water in it. You got a whole really wet year. You've got some moisture. Probably wasn't necessarily water table coming up completely. It's just that everything was saturated and things moved and heaved up. But once you get a pool in place, as long as you've got the water on top, holding it down, it's usually a very stable situation. Very little, because if you've got the pressure on top from the water on it and pressure on the bottom, that holds it all in place. And like I have in the report, like in the wintertime when you go through and drain it, and you don't completely drain any pool. You leave some water in it, and typically you drain it just down below your inlets. Your return water going into the pool, you drain just below that, so all that piping can drain, but you keep the rest of it underwater, and that provides that weight to hold it down. And so if you do have a wet spring before anything happens, you've got enough weight there to prevent it from heaving up. Now, you could do some additional stuff. Usually you don't see a whole lot. Sometimes places will go through if they have a known water table issue or a high water table, you'll run a drain tile system around the perimeter of the pool. And that's about the most extensive anybody gets with an outdoor pool as far as groundwater issues. Usually it's pretty stable on that as long as the initial part and not draining it down. If you drain it down, do it at a time of year when there's not the water issue going on.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I understand the equalization, but when we go to hire the repair, what have you seen done? What have contractors done in the past when they do have sort of a known groundwater issue when they do the repair to ensure it doesn't fail prematurely?
Usually they don't do a whole lot on that end of it. Usually it's due to repair when known water levels are low enough and then just make sure you maintain the water in the pool afterwards. It's I would say probably, if somebody really got into it, they'd put in extra drainage around the outside, but very rarely do you see any of that going on. I mean, I've had a few experiences with some outdoor pools where it has been an issue, but it's not been dramatic issues. Usually it's where it's heaved, they'll cut it out, epoxy it back in. There's different types of epoxy for adhering the new concrete to the old, and they just go on from that. And they just realize that there's going to be a few times. I mean, it's nature to an extent of if you're in a really bad spot and you're not really in a horrible spot for groundwater. I mean, I'll give you an example. City Mulvane's old pool was down along their main drainage swale going through town. And it had a history of doing stuff over the years. And it was just one of those things every once in a while they'd have to go through and repair, but it was in the floodway through town. So hence the reason why when they built their new pool, they moved it out farther out of town.
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to comment, that was really helpful because the table water, I was afraid you were going to say, wow, you guys are ridiculous for having a pool here and you should just fill it in and it shouldn't have never been there. But hearing that was, the feedback I've heard from residents and the feedback from the survey, I think we should keep it open and do these repairs. It seems like there's value here for our residents, even though it's not Rock River Rapids, it's not the North Y. I think our comparative advantage is it's close and it's a simple pool, but they can still enjoy it. It's not paid off till 2030. And I'm glad to hear Brian's report about the price increase and also not just helping the revenue, but helping regulate, not getting it too full in there. So that's where I'm standing right now based on that information.
Mr. Mayor. David and Mr. Warden. So of all those options, is there one that stands out as the most value?
I really haven't looked too much into on the plaster finishes as which one to really look at on that one. I mean, seems like we see a wide variety of different finishes on pools. And so I never really get into the specifics too terribly much right now as far as those specific ones. And we could look into that a little deeper to see which ones seem to have more of which would have the best bang for the buck type situation.
So I think the options that Brian shared with us included a vinyl option and the plaster options with various degrees of the plaster options. I think in your report, you kind of said you're going to have to do something about every 7 years, typically, whether it's vinyl or whether it's plaster. And so in my mind, that would mean you would just look at your options and pick whichever one was cheaper.
Yeah. In a lot of situations, I'd probably say on an outdoor pool, I'd probably lean more towards the plaster or painted finish as opposed to a vinyl liner. And more of that reasoning is if you have some paint or plaster spalled off in a short-term type situation, you could go in there and sort of finish off the edges so it's not too abrasive on that end of it and still be functional on that part. You get a vinyl liner, and vinyl is more dependent upon UV and the overall abuse. It's not going to take the abuse quite as well as the plaster finish. If you do get a penetration through the vinyl, you've got to do something relatively quick because you don't want it leaking behind it.
And then the painted option, is that a different option other than plaster?
It is a little bit different, yeah.
Okay.
Now,
So that
you
would
would
be
have
something
to,
that
since you
we-
have a plaster finish right now, you'd have to do some additional work to remove some of that to go to that direction.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I guess one of the things in the back of my mind, thinking about the history of the pool with the groundwater, more than one time that's been brought up and been an issue during construction or repair. I almost wonder if it's not in our best interest to get a price for how much it would cost to put in, if we're going to go through the effort of doing a new liner and doing a new pump and opening the pool, what would keep us from at least getting a price on if we have a groundwater issue? Here's how much the drain tile system would cost to put in. Let's get it done so we can get it open next year. What would be the downside to doing that? I guess is my question. So that we had that.
Does that not
Possibility.
require an excavation around the perimeter?
No,
of the pool?
I'm not disagreeing that it would be a more invasive, but what would be the disadvantage to at least figuring out what that cost would look like so that we're sort of prepared for that?
I guess the only downside I can think of is that if we aren't willing to pay for that, we're just kind of wasting everyone's time. And I'm guessing it'll be pretty expensive, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's not typically needed.
I would interject a little bit. I mean, putting the drain tile system around it, I mean, your biggest part is digging the trench. That's your cost. You'd want to be a foot or two below what your water level is in the pool, which is only 5.5 feet. So you're not a very deep trench, but it's deep enough that you've either got to taper it out or you've got to short it as you're putting it through. So, and you wouldn't necessarily have to go around the side of the building. You could basically encompass the three sides around the perimeter up to the building and around and do something along those lines. And it doesn't necessarily have to be right at the pool wall. I mean, it can be outside of your deck area. I mean, you're just providing a place for anything that would be coming in, either surface drainage, more of the more shallow type surface within the first couple of feet. If there's a really wet, rainy year and it's just draining through and around the facility, it's just an easier path for it to get out. So it's, I mean, putting a price to it really isn't too terribly bad. Because you'd take it out to a couple of manholes. You'd set a couple of manholes and put a pump basically inside one of those manholes. I'm assuming that storm drainage from the streets and whatnot isn't that deep in that area. So you'd have to pump it, lift it up to get it up into something else.
I don't know, Brian. It was just an idea. If we're gonna have the pool, if we're gonna have a lot of work going on in the pool to get it ready for next year, is it worth at least finding out what that price would be and deciding, do we just do it, or are we comfortable just putting a new liner in and expecting it's gonna fail in 5 or 7 years and that's gonna get us by and we're fine? Like, I'm not trying to solve a bigger problem that might not be there, but just figured I'd throw it out there.
Do we think that the groundwater issue is having an impact on the lifespan of the liner solutions?
To be honest, I don't think it really is a significant player on that.
So the main purpose of groundwater drain tiles would be while the pool is drained and there's not any back pressure on it, you'd be buying some insurance that you're not going to have an issue with the pool failing while it's empty.
Right.
Okay.
How long would that work take? The plastering and all that? You're talking about doing it this fall, right?
It's too late for fall, they're all booked.
Oh,
So we would have to probably do it early spring before the rainy season. Or chance it during the rainy season. Or wait till next fall.
mhm. Okay.
Usually you did in about 2 weeks. Your size of pool may be
Well,
less than
the last time it was replastered, the first time, say it was replastered in about a week, but then the bottom failed, so then
Right.
they had to tear the bottom out, so then it took about 2 weeks to do it the second time.
So,
So 10 days, depending on weather.
So Brian, if the timing didn't work out just right, to get the pool open, we've got to do the pump, obviously. And because the crack's not leaking, could we technically get by, but we wouldn't want to? Am I understanding that correctly?
Now, that crack was there all this summer.
Okay.
It wasn't very pretty, but it was there all
Okay.
It's very noticeable.
Yeah.
But I guess my follow-up question would be, if we put the drain tile system in, could it be done during a non-rain? I'm not saying during like a downpour, but if we put that in, would that open up the schedule for these lining folks to do it in a non-preferred time?
it probably would a little bit, because you'd have a little bit of a safety factor in case it did all of a sudden get wet for a week and postpone them right in the middle of their process. I mean, that's probably the biggest part that you would gain from that, is just if the pool was empty and you had a week of heavy rain type situation, that you would.
I heard some crazy stories from some of these plaster people where they have water underneath the pool, and before they plaster it, they drill holes in the pool floor and pump the water out, and then patch it back real fast and put the plaster back down.
Yep.
So there's ways to get around
There's ways.
the water underneath.
Yeah, I mean, they basically, what they're doing is just opening holes to let the hydrostatic pressure relieve itself. And then what they didn't say directly is they're epoxying those holes back in just before they put the finish back on, when they feel it is, the pressure's gone down. So, like I said, I don't think there's a big hydrostatic issue, really. I mean, you feel like you're down in a hole on that around the pool and such, but it really isn't horrible on that end of it.
I guess just hearing and knowing all that, I know we've probably beat this horse to death enough. I guess I'd feel comfortable just moving forward with repairing the crack and going with the preferred, whatever the preferred option is for a liner, whether that be a painted finish if it's worth considering that, or whether it be the other plaster options, and just seeing how it works in the spring. And I guess that's probably the best we could hope for and see if it works.
I personally think it would benefit us to explore that interglass a little farther. I know it's twice as much, but it might be a lot better surface, and it does seem to have a longer expected life. It won't hurt anything to look into that farther. If Brad could maybe research that and talk to those folks. I talked to him a little bit, and it sounds great to me, but I've also been told by these plaster people, you don't coat a plaster surface. Well, these guys coat a plaster surface. So, and they've been doing it for years. So apparently they have some experience doing it with this product, not an epoxy or a paint product. It's a different kind of product. I think
Well, just judging from the fact that you said you can't get the pool plastered this fall, I think you got plenty of time. Go do some more research. Yeah, okay.
One last thing on that question. I know we always say the pool breaks even except for the water costs and the staff managing it, but also that maintenance component. On any of those lining options, will that reduce staff time with maintenance?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
Not really.
still have to clean.
But you do some plastering repairs on your own without calling other people in, right? Okay.
All right. Well, any other questions for Mr. Ward or Mr. Hayes?
No, I don't think I have any other questions, but just an observation. I feel like at this time last year, we were having the same conversation about potentially replastering the pool, and it was already too late to get on the schedule then. So I think we need to figure out how to not be having the same conversation at the same time.
I don't have this
Next year.
conversation next year at this time, right? No, we need to have a decision before this time of the
We
year.
can get the pool plastered this spring.
Okay. Well, then I would anticipate come back with this, with your recommendations and let's see what we can do. Okay? Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And if
Appreciate it.
Anybody has any questions, you can either hunt me down on contact on this or go through Brian either way. Happy to help.
I'll be talking to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is the Public Works Facility, and don't know who is going to talk about that, or you're Mr. Marty?
I was trying to get Marty to do it.
Nobody wanted to jump in and do that, huh?
Good evening. My name is Jeff Best. I'm a landscape architect with LK Architecture, and with me is Tony Rangel. He's also with LK Architecture, and he's an architect. And we have been working on this for the last few months, and I'm sure this will be the absolute most exciting thing you've heard tonight, because we're up here doing
Okay.
it. Now, ours isn't nearly as pretty as Carissa's, number one. Number two is, let's see if we can. There we go. So you already have this report. I'm sure you've already perused this at least 3 or 4 times, and you know it very, very well. So I'm not going to go through this in word for word. What I will start off with is kind of talk about what we were asked to do. Initially, we were asked to look at 2 sites and evaluate them for a public works facility. The existing site off of Woodlawn, and then another site in Sunflower. To do that, we actually had to do a lot more work, right? We actually had to go through a fair amount of programming to figure out what the public works facility of the future would look like. To do that, we worked very closely with Marty and his staff to come up with kind of their ideal facility. We also kind of balanced that also with projections out about 20 years. To do that, we kind of looked at a few models, one of which was Derby. I know Derby's quite a bit larger, so we obviously scaled it back, but they have a lot of things that I know Marty really liked, and we went down there and toured that. It was actually Marty's second time, and actually my second time, maybe yours too. Anyway, really great facility. It's been in use for quite a while. The public works director really spent a lot of time with us. We got a lot of really beneficial information out of that. One of the interesting things, and this is a little anecdotal, but keep in the back of your mind, something that the public works director down there said that he noticed now, and this is kind of post-COVID, right? A slight decentralization happening down there. So keep that in mind as you kind of look at what we're doing and think about that as into the future as well.
Andover was another.
And Andover as well, sorry. Andover is really about the size today that you're projected to be in about 20 years, while you would be about half the size in 20 years that Derby is today, if you can follow my math there. So we'll get through all of this. I don't know if we need to talk a whole lot about the existing site. I think you've all toured that. You've been down there. So you're pretty aware of its limitations and its issues to date. And then, of course, you're aware of the parcel up in Sunflower, I'm sure, as well. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those 2 sites. What we did do is a pretty thorough building program. And if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of that, Tony will be happy to really drill down in that. But what we do is we try to break down spaces and uses, and then we apply that to a building footprint plan. Sorry, this is not kind of pulled down quite enough, but you do have the full plan in your packet there. I'm not saying that this is the building that you're going to build, okay? But this takes that program and it organizes those spaces in a logical way. When it comes down to when you get to that point when you're actually going to build this facility, it may not look like this. There may be spaces that you choose or opt not to do. There may be some spaces that you enlarge when you fully design it. But again, taking that program and applying it, again, because we needed to use a model for each of these sites to evaluate them, correct? Oh, there we go. Man, thanks, you're magic. Okay. Okay, now I can't forward it. There we go.
Back. Oh, no, there we go.
The existing facility or the existing site has an existing building on it. We did talk about what would happen if we removed it, but we said, well, that's actually a benefit of the site. You wouldn't want to lose that. It's of value, correct? So we left that, of course, in play on the existing site. There is some monies in there in the estimate on the existing site, so it's a little skewed, but there's monies in there to renovate this building somewhat for some other additional uses, okay? Why take away a building that's obviously you can use? So that does account for some of the difference in the costs between the two sites, which I'm sure nobody's looked at, right? Nobody's looked at the back couple pages yet.
That's why we put it at the back. Otherwise you wouldn't see anything else.
We went to the last page first.
Everybody does that for some reason. And then there's the barn. We lovingly call it the barn. This is basically just a very, very large storage facility to get most of your equipment and vehicles, undercover. Obviously, they represent a lot of cost, a lot of investment. We want to get them inside as much as we possibly can out of the weather elements.
It also has an exterior.
And it does have a
component
lean-to as well.
Lean-to on the side.
So just a handful of similar type of elements that you would see on a public works facility that would be costing into the overall. Yeah, nothing revolutionary here. We've all seen it. This is an inventory of current equipment that you have, and then projected additional equipment into the future. This is, again, what we took into account to kind of size the site and the buildings. And then the sites. Existing site. There's only one type of or shape of property that's harder to deal with than this one. It's a triangle, right? Long, skinny site. Not the greatest to use. It really is challenging. That building that we used, it fits by this much to get the turn radiuses in and out of those bays. Very tight. Does not allow you any kind of buffering against those, those residential lots that are right next door, unfortunately, against the main facility building. Now you get a little bit further to the west. Yeah, it frees up a little bit of room for some buffer, but that's a pretty good sized building. What was the eave height on that? Do you recall?
Yeah, we were at 18.
Okay,
It
so
was 18.
and those houses actually sit up quite a bit higher than the public works facility site as it is today. So even if we do go ahead and put that 8-foot wall in that we have priced in there, those decks are looking right over that thing, right at that building. There's also some issues. Circulation wise, it works. It's not great overall, again, because of the, how skinny the site is. It's not a lot of extra space out there for debris and refuse.
Push it to the next slide.
The turning out on Woodlawn as well gets a little challenging because of proximity to the tracks. So when you get some cars stacked up in there, you're going to have some issues there. Now, granted, we do have an access out the west side. That's great. I don't know how the neighborhood feels about having a lot of public works traffic coming in and out of that way.
Proximity to the neighborhood is also one of the considerations in the analysis. There's, I wouldn't call it considerable additional paving, but there's additional paving on this site
Yeah,
than you find on the new site because of the circulation criteria that we were applying to both sides.
it was interesting. We went through the costing and I was like, well, where's the extra money coming from? And obviously, renovation of the existing building that we want to keep. Well, you expect that. But my paving costs were jumping up a bit and I couldn't quite figure that out until I started really looking at, because of, we're keeping the existing building and some inefficiencies in site circulation, like Tony was referring to, just to the east of the new facility. I'm just going to run up here and point it out. This is kind of the culprit area, right? So I'm paving a lot more space that I'm not getting that benefit or efficient benefit that I am on the other side on.
And then the wall.
And then, of course, the cost of the screen wall. And that would be running along the north and west. I figure along the tracks, we could probably do a fence and not offend the railroad too much. So the sunflower site, obviously a lot more conducive. It's a better shape. It's a little bigger, allows us better circulation, gives us a lot more flexibility in how we set the site up. Although it really worked out really nicely because, again, we were not locked in. It puts the kind of the fuel center kind of where I wanted it. Again, dealing with a virgin site, you just get those benefits. A lot more area for debris, things of that nature. Obviously, you're coming out onto a concrete street, which then accesses two directions onto arterials. That's exactly what you want. So there's some distinct benefits of the site over the other.
Expandability is another one.
Now, initially, I think we were looking at 2 lots over here. We put it on one, and I didn't see a lot of benefit to using the other. Does that make sense? I mean, I had to make up some uses, I think, for the other lot. So we didn't really show any expansion over there because, again, I think we felt like we got everything on here that you were going to need in 20 years. Plus, thinking about that potential down the road of decentralization of some size and shape, where you may have mowers, stored at off location in some other spots around town. It didn't make sense. Marty, am I missing anything?
No, I think you covered pretty much.
And you? Okay. I just want to make sure. I tend to forget things as I'm standing up here. And I'm delaying getting to the last couple of sheets. Okay, so costs. These are conceptual. And again, this is based on what we've come up with here. Not saying that this is actually what you're going to build. Existing public works site, all in, that big fat number down there is 16.2 million. There's a fair amount of contingencies in this as well. And Tony, you might want to talk just a little bit about those.
Well, and I might back up for a second too, because one of the things that we looked at in our evaluation was giving the building some definition, right? And if you go back and look at that programming, it tells you metal building, for instance, the vehicle maintenance, metal building, but it has some masonry on the inside face. But there's only a wainscot or, waist high amount of it. And that's for durability and so forth. And then we do the same thing on the outside, give it a little bit of value or look to it. And that could be give or take which site, right? But we applied the same principle for the building on both sides, so we could do this apples to apples comparison as much as we could. That way you could really see where the price differences were, as we mentioned, the paving, the extra paving on the existing site, renovation of the existing building on the existing site, the wall and so forth. I would also mention this is, we double checked this with a couple of contractors here in town. So this is pricing as of, I'll say at midsummer, early summer, but things continue to change. There's been evolution as to the amount of inflation to apply. And so one of the things that we have in here, if you look at the bottom of both of them.
Well, now I'm going to jump in and interrupt you.
Oh,
and we had to make
okay.
some assumptions on site development, obviously utilities and things like that. But we applied those obviously equally to each site.
So under project administration, you'll see, well, first of all, just if you go down the list there, you can see a breakdown of site costs and they're applied across both sites. And that's why you see different numbers because the sites are different sizes, right? The building costs generally are the same with the exception of the existing site for the renovation of the existing building. Miscellaneous structures are generally the same as well. So that cost was consistent. And then you get down to some of these administrative costs. Now, they're applied as a percent against the total construction or project cost. So that's why there's a subtotal for structures in there, right?
Site building structures total is kind of that raw cost.
There's your base number, if you will, for the cost for each at each site. And then these administrative costs get applied as a percent against. So general conditions generally during construction, right? That's for the cost of the administrator on site, the superintendent, equipment that the contractor uses, porta potties, temporary utilities, stuff like that. That's what general conditions are. Overhead profit, that's an obvious for the general contractor. And that's a general number that's applied today. Contingency. So we apply a 5% when we're in this conceptual phase. You could apply more if you think about some of the concerns that you might have with construction. The escalation and inflation factor. So it was 8% last year. So we applied that. It was 10% the year before, and it was 12% the year before that. So it's been coming down, but we just stuck with the 8% and we applied just 1 year. Okay. So if you delay, you just keep adding that inflation factor. It might diminish a little bit, might be 6% next year. I don't know. Don't have that crystal ball. But that's an important number for you to apply in looking to the future and how you want to think about the costs on these projects. The two contingencies that come after that, and there's a reason, sorry, let me back up. Soft costs, that's for all of the things that are listed there, the design fees for all the design professionals, testing and permits, commissioning of buildings, testing the air before it's open, and all those things get applied as a percent against that. Then you wind up with that total project cost. We also look at the future in the sense under contingencies, two things. So today we work with Marty and his staff. Tomorrow, if you wait years, it may not be Marty, maybe a new staff, maybe a new director who says, now we want to do it this way. And it changes the complexion of the project. That's an owner contingency. So it's been our experience, and trust me, we've had this experience.
Well, and not only that, but that contingency, and I would encourage every owner on every project to hold a contingency on every project that you have. Because as you get into a project, you might want to make a change. You may want to make
Different operational needs.
a different
whatever.
material, something like that. It gives you that flexibility.
So then we also apply on top of that a design contingency. And I'm going to give you a great example of this. So when we go down and look at Derby's a wonderful facility, obviously a larger facility. They've got more resources available. That is a tilt-up concrete frame building. Durable as all get out. It's going to be there for a long time. It's great for maintenance and operation and that sort of thing. But wow, we're looking at a metal building with some simple CMU for your durability here. And that's what the pricing is that's in here. But if you decided, new staff comes in, somebody decides that they want to go tilt up concrete frame, now you're starting to apply that 20% design contingency over what we project the cost to be today. So we're giving you some flexibility and conversation here because we also know from experience that you get down the road 2 or 3 years and everybody says, well, gosh, here's the price. Why is it that we went to tilt up concrete frame and it doesn't match this budget anymore? Well,
How many
that's why.
times does a client come back? Yeah, in
That's
3
why
years.
we
it's
put
like,
in there, we qualify what that building design is all about as well. So those are things to look at. Another thing to apply here, and it's both sites, you can phase all of this. So you don't have to build everything all at once. And that's something to consider when you're looking to the future and how you use this document. So it's not just an all-in, all-encompassing. You can look at it as a way of making some decisions going forward, working with your staff as to what's the critical need today versus tomorrow and then 20 years, and how do we get into this in a phased way, in a responsible way. So with that.
And I think that just makes a ton of sense to phase things in as over time. Again, you're talking about a 20-year plan. I'm not so sure you'd run out there and build the whole thing right off the bat necessarily. Sorry. but
Is either site more conducive to the phasing?
No. The reason is because I tried to set it up in such a way that it could be phased pretty much the same way on either site, if that makes sense. And the way I looked at the phasing or potential phasing would be your public works building proper, which is the admin and maintenance building. Okay.
The T, the top of the T there.
Right, is kind of a standalone. Now, we could add phase, but I don't think, and Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about this, we probably don't ever foresee adding maintenance phase, frankly. The barn could come set. That could come down the road. And the barn is set up basically like a metal building where it's in sections, right? You don't have to build necessarily the entire 110 feet. You may end up building 60 feet today, another 60 feet in 10 years, and just add on to it. too. That's another possibility. But how they're set up on each site, you can do that incrementally.
Some of the amenities, or some of those additional amenities, like the brine storage, the salt storage, material storage, those, those you probably want to bring them on early on. But you have some to some degree today. It's probably not the optimum quantity or size, but you could grow into it. So you could use both sites for a while, right? And that's part of the decentralization idea too for phasing. There's that potential. You could also use another site that the city might own as decentralization. Maybe take one of these smaller components and put it on a third site.
You know, we even discussed, well, what if you did build the new facility at Sunflower, but you kept the old site, right, for debris? You kept the building down there. Maybe you had all your mowers down there and kind of almost have that as the parks area as a potential use if you weren't going to sell that property. I mean, that could be something for discussion, certainly. But we didn't want to play a lot of games within this study because we had to keep it as clean and as apples to apples, because you start chasing rabbits, you know, all of a sudden, and you get lost in it.
Other questions?
Mr. Mayor. So of course, the first thing that jumps out, you partially answered, is why the old site is 2 million more. And I noticed it ends up with an extra building. So,
It does.
so you could just raise that building, or why do you need that extra building
You
then?
could
Or-
raise it. You absolutely could. I just didn't see any site benefit necessarily to getting rid of that building.
Right?
So I
Why
couldn't-
isn't there a benefit to keeping that building that saves you from another building?
Well, and it could. You could make the judgment that that building could take the place of the big barn
Well, not
for
entirely.
storage. Not entirely, because it's not the same size. Correct.
So it wouldn't house all of the equipment that you have today, nor what you're planning to have tomorrow. So that's why we kind of left both of them on that site.
Mhm.
So how did you go back?
But yes, you are 100% right.
Yeah.
But we wanted to leave them both on there to prove that we could build the barn on there as well, even though you may not choose to build the barn there and you may just utilize the existing facility for storage.
If you go back to those programming pages in the front, you would also see the square footage for that existing building, and what we have planned for this, for two different things. Moreover, this is, I'll say it's broken up a bit in the way, because it's vehicle maintenance today. And you can use those areas, those bays for storage. But you might also continue to use some of this other space for other types of public works storage. And not just put all vehicles in there, but you can see the variance in the size between that and this. You could keep this and cut this down, and that would be another way of tackling that. But we wanted to really give you the purest form of this sort of apples to apples, so you can kind of see what are the general things that are different. One of them is renovating this, right? It's not on the other side. If you just raised it, it's some 650,000, which you just don't spend. But you still have a variant between the two sites in full development. Because of the wall, because of the paving.
Yeah, if the existing site was actually the same size the whole way, instead of tapering down in a corner like that, it'd be a little easier too. And that space would have actually become more usable. It's just that east end is just, it's difficult to deal with.
You know, the thing that we put in there with the analysis, and we deliberately don't give a recommendation. You want this one or that, because that's for you to decide. That's your role, is to figure out with these strengths and weaknesses on this site versus the other, you may see them as opposite. The weaknesses might be seen as strengths for some reason or another. It's your perceptive value that has to come into play as to what that recommendation would be.
Can you comment a little more on the decentralization? You talked about the phasing, there's value there, but is there value in keeping your assets in two different spots just in case of catastrophe, or what are some other possible benefits?
Well, in our conversation with the Public Works Director in Derby, they were all centralized. That's why they have one big facility. But over the years, they've decentralized away from that. And now they're utilizing they've crafted some areas on parks land
They have.
because of,
It was a couple things. First was they weren't finding that they had to have all the staff come in the morning and go out and come in the evening and, so, and collectively be there all at once. They could communicate with them adequately without them coming back to base, essentially. So they didn't have to have those kinds of facilities, or they weren't using the facilities they built for that. How about that? That was one. Two was they had remote mowing areas. And in a couple of their larger parks, they had buildings. They'd actually store the mowers right there. So they weren't having to haul them. And so they were kind of starting to do that. And I think they were even doing that a little bit with snow removal.
right, the snow removal, because they've got more street.
Yeah, they're quite a bit larger, but you
But
understand.
you're thinking about that into the future, and this site is extreme quadrant of the city, right? And as the city grows, it's going to be away from that site. And so that's a consideration, something to look to in the future, and how you might evaluate the value of spending more money at that site versus the Sunflower site. It's a little more centralized where in the area of the city right now.
And you may not end up there. You may not decentralize on equipment ever. It just kind of depends on, how Bel Aire moves. It also depends on Public Works, how Public Works operates in the future too, because they'll change just like all of our jobs are changing, I think, over time. Right, Warren?
One question I had, what you mentioned earlier about building the barn and then building onto it. Have you ever seen clients take the approach of building the big barn, outfitting a part of it to be the admin, and then as that grows and they need more space for the barn, building the second building? Have you seen anybody take that approach? I understand there'd be cost of the remodel, but if that's like a 10-year plan, build the big, simple
The
building.
dilemma with that is it's usually the barn. The barn is a pretty simple building, and we don't have much utility into it.
Right.
There probably, we talked about whether we needed to have a bathroom out there or not. Here you've got, in the admin area, it's more conditioned space.
Sure.
It's got offices, break room, you've got your restrooms and locker room and such. So there's more utility to this, multi-purpose space, that sort of thing. Vehicle maintenance is a bit of a hybrid, so it's got power requirements. This also has a wash bay in it, but that's pretty empty.
Right.
So to think about drawing utilities for all of that use, all the way out there, starts to kind of diminish the value of just making it a simple, inexpensive building.
Right.
So yes, the answer is yes, it's been done before, but then again, I think about the city of Wichita out at the old dump site. So there's large vehicle maintenance that has some admin in it, and they added the admin. It was a vehicle maintenance space. They added the admin to it, and now it's kind of abandoned, and it's not adaptable enough for the type of equipment they have out there. They do use it for some storage, but it's kind of expensive. So it's old bathrooms and a couple of offices and a break room, and now they're storing a tool crib and parts cribs and that sort of thing. Yeah, you could do it, but is it the highest use? More likely, you would build something, you might make your admin smaller or split it up and have two locations depending on operations and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Vehicle maintenance is liable to be one centralized facility. You tend to do that. KDOT does it that way as well. The barn, you make that a lot of different ways because it's a flexible solution.
Yeah, to me, the maintenance bays are kind of a set item. Admin can probably do this, and the barn can come in phases or down the line.
Thank you.
Marty, would you agree with that?
Good questions. I mean, it's a great way to sort of evaluate,
Trust me,
use this as a tool that way, right?
yeah. Again, when we were getting into this, we started chasing a lot of what if. So, yeah, if you have something, bring it up. We may have already thought about it, and if you haven't, then great. You stumped us maybe. It's an interesting problem. I told Tony on the way out here, I was thinking about it, I was like, we shouldn't have called this a master plan necessarily because it's kind of one step above. It's more of a study because it's really a site analysis and a master plan kind of dovetailed.
And
Because it
programming.
does, and programming.
It's simple.
But we found that we had to do the programming to get the basis of design to apply to each site, to evaluate each site. So it just kind of, trickled down that.
So one of the other things that's rolling around in my mind is we've talked a lot about City Hall and how we're busting at the seams and we need more room in City Hall. And we've talked about a separate community facility. Does this facility allow for us to move some of the stuff that's in City Hall to that in either situation? Are you seeing services move from City Hall that currently are in City Hall to this facility, or was that a part of any of your thought process, and how could we take that in consideration?
How about yes and no, kind of?
So if you look at this site, well, okay, you go to that. If you look at the Sunflower site, and one of the things Jeff pointed out, that other corner walker up here, not necessarily something you need for this future plan. Again, the apples to apples tells us that's the area we need. Like we have some expand beyond. So we've got some good room here. What do you do with this? You own it. What do you do with that? What could you bring together? Well, there's a fuel center here. So if PD were to go out there, you could have a common fuel center, right? You don't have that for them. Well, do they use the fuel center today? They don't use it, right?
Yeah.
So that could be a functional change that you could explore.
We have to put a coffee dispenser there. Right, your range though.
Yeah, now you didn't like that. You could go down there, you could go to Quick Trip.
I guess what I'm getting at too is the facility as you're proposing it isn't it's a public works facility, but it would not be used by the public. Public would not be coming to this facility to visit with the clerk, to pay bills. It's just a functional public works facility in its truest sense.
It could though. So since you've got that simple access and we show the admin up there, just a multi-purpose space. It's applied again, both sides. It's a multi-purpose space. It's also a shelter. That was planned in, that's master plan, you budgeted into it. And that space could become a public use space, if you will. It's not going to be a new community center, no. But it's in another part of the community and people could use it. How often would they go to Sunflower Industrial Park? I don't know. I mean, it's actually a nice industrial park. You've got nice uses there, so it's not extraordinary for people to think they might go there. The other thing is you could consider, and this was not part of our responsibility here in the study, but if you had co-located facilities for PD or some other use that you bring on that site, then you open up more here, right, to utilize. And that's not so much in PD, I wouldn't say there is some public access, but it's not community center, right?
So to circle back, the administrative part of this building would be on a public facing side. So yes, the public could access that facility. If you wanted to have bill paying, things like that, those uses could certainly be added to the building, the final building that gets designed. And it could serve those purposes. Back to Tony's point on PD, with the fuel center there's probably some good things going, that they can use. You could also think about possibly, it depends on PD, but evidence storage, and if they wanted to co-locate evidence within that barn building in a secured space in that, so there's some things you
And
can start
vehicle
toying with,
storage, too.
and possibly, yeah, vehicle storage.
And then it's also, it's a captured site, so you can get some security here. I mean, the other side's got security too as well, but there's no residents necessarily out in here.
The other thing, and Marty, this always goes back to how public, and you and everybody wants to operate with service to how much service you actually want to do, right? On the fleet, on PD fleet, on, because we do have maintenance bays too. And if they're kind of co-located on the same site, it starts having some relationships there. But again, that goes back to operations, really.
If you were to do that, you would explore something, it would look different, right?
That's a long
Certainly.
answer.
Certainly an opportunity.
Well, I know that was outside your purview, but I appreciate kind of expanding on that a little bit.
It's great to have those options, frankly. Other questions or thoughts?
I know you mentioned
You-
I know you mentioned one of the site weaknesses of Sunflower was the marketability of property for sale. If we totally abandon the current public works site, what do you foresee being right against the railroad there, and commercial to the south? Do you see that? Like, who would want to buy that?
A little bit. I was like, well, I mean, storage units always, but then storage units right up against, single family
We're not
residential.
brokers.
Yeah, I know. I know that's not your area, but
And
just
probably it might be some type of multifamily potentially.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there could be a handful of uses. It's a long skinny site, so it's not infinite by any means. But if you can have access off Woodlawn, access to that, and run a road all the way through, you can probably get something done. Something that doesn't need visibility, obviously.
But also realize that out at the Sunflower site, that other site has marketability too. I know there's some rule of capture that you've got to hang on to for a while, but eventually that has value as well. So you got to weigh that in your thinking.
The other potential, benefit, I suppose, and I think this is probably in here on going to Sunflower, is you can operate public works on the existing site until you're open day one and just move. And so you don't have this kind of, working on top of, trying to do your operations when the contractor's out there trying to build a building, kind of like keeping a QT open when you're trying to build one right behind it.
And the paving.
Logistical issues.
Something to paving, we did as a standard in our approach as to how much paving we would plan for the turnaround and such. But there are also, gravel's an option. I wouldn't suggest that asphalt is, but you would still have concrete aprons, but you could reduce some of the concrete and reduce some of that site cost.
There's ways to,
But we applied the similar principle across both sides. So that, again, you get that apples to apples comparison.
and once you got into final design with the final architect, you sort through all those things.
You'll notice you've got a paving number in there. We did that on purpose so that you could do that. Well, what if we didn't have as much concrete paving? All right. You start chopping that number down and you can evaluate that. You can see where it fits.
Most every project, things come down to priorities once you get into final design. And the architect that you end up going, hiring for this, they'll take you through those and get you to the end.
Great questions. Good insight.
But this is a good solid, stepping off point, I think. Again, the facility probably won't look like what we have in here, but, and it won't offend us if it doesn't. That's okay. But it's a very good stepping off point for you.
Any other questions, concern? Well, we appreciate the efforts and the concepts and work, and we'll have to give this more thought and decide what we want to do go
Sure.
forward. So, okay,
Absolutely.
but it's very good. Thank you.
So if you have any other
Thank you.
questions,
Appreciate it.
good luck with it going forward.
Yeah. All right. So, the other thing on the agenda, are there any other topics we need to discuss? Hearing none, we can probably just say we're done for the evening and everybody go home and have a great evening, and we will see you next Tuesday. All right. So, thank you.